All right, so let's finish up some background information on Othello. I'd like you to include notes on this in your actual annotations for Othello for the first act. So I'll kind of put these randomly. Some of them will go with characters, and I'll show you where to put that, but you can really put it anywhere. So the copy that you have, um, it has the acts and scenes laid out. So any of this intro material, like maybe here's a good space for you to write some notes right before the synopsis, and then we'll take some notes specifically on the characters here. So let's say this is a good space, this is a good space. So I'm going to put some text box here, and I want you to do the same thing on yours because you can refer back to it. So, I'll click a text box and we'll do what color font should I do? Let's do some green font here. Okay. So, um, some of the background for Othello. You've learned about a few of the things, and I'll hit them, but one of the biggest things, kind of the overarching thing I want to talk about is climate theory. Um, So I haven't gotten to watch all of your presentations yet. One, because some of you haven't submitted them, but actually that's the reason I haven't submitted them. So I'm going to talk about this. That maybe some of you talked about climate theory in your presentations, but I'm going to emphasize that. So climate theory was in the race and religion group, and basically this was the idea that where you lived determined a lot about you. And so, kind of the biggest thing is that uh, if you people who lived in the north where it was colder, they were generally considered, pardon the pun, but more chill. So they were calm, rational, even tempered, subdued. All those kind of words would describe them. And in contrast, people who lived in the South, in warmer climates, um, were considered rash, irrational, even violent, passionate. And so that was the overall stereotype for these people. I'll kind of move this here. That was the overall stereotype. And this was based on something called a theory of like medicine called the four humors. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that before, but they basically it was this idea that your body is made up of four liquids. You're bossy. Your body is made up of four liquids. Fluids might be a better word. And those were blood, phlegm. Let's see if I spell phlegm right. Phlegm. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. So this seems like a weird thing. Like, why do we need to know this for Othello? But this idea of the four humors, it's called humorism sometimes, was a theory of medicine at the time, and it informed a lot of what they thought about people and how they justified their actions at this time. So they thought your body was made up of these four fluids, and also your makeup of those four fluids like was dependent on where you lived. So these four fluids had different qualities. I'm actually going to show you, and I might copy this. So we're going to look up the four humors. And we do this, like this Wikipedia article is actually pretty helpful for this because it has a pretty nice chart right here. So it shows 4 humors. I'll make it bigger for us, maybe. Oh, it's not letting me. Probably not letting me because we are um, filming. Let me pause it. So I just screenshotted it and made it bigger. So these are the 4 humors, like I said, and you see they're associated with different things. So they had these qualities that relate to climate. So blood was associated with more, it's warm and moist. If you think of it as a fluid, it is warm and moist. So if you lived in a climate that was warm and moist, people thought that you had more blood than other people. If you lived in a cold, moist climate, think England, then that you probably had more phlegm. Like phlegm is like snot, so if you touch it, it's cold and moist. So it makes sense there. So if you lived in a climate like that, they thought you had more of that, and it was associated with different things, different elements. But it was also associated with temperaments, and so these are some interesting words you might start using to refer to these things. But I think the one we use the most is melancholic. So melancholic is like melancholy, it's like sadness, depression, very subdued. So kind of same with phlegmatic, where sanguine means more like extroverted and like um, outgoing and putting yourself out there, all of that kind of stuff. So they were associated with these temperaments. So going back here, they thought that the humors that made up your body, that if they were in balance, if you had equal amounts of everything, then you were good. You were very even, like everything was good, working well. But your humors could become out of balance. You could get too much of one or too little of another, and that could cause illness, but also mental illness. It could cause you to act a certain way or feel a certain way. If you've heard about the I don't know what word I'm looking for, but if you've heard about bloodletting, when people used to be sick, and so they would like let them bleed out, and that would supposed to cure them. That was because of this theory. Like they thought, oh, you have a temper, that means you have too much blood, and so we're going to let some blood out, and that's supposed to fix it. Not an accurate theory, obviously, but that's what they thought. Um, so these things, this belief really affected how they saw people, and how they saw people who lived in different places. So if you were someone who lived in the South, then you probably had more blood. If you lived in a warm, moist environment, if you lived in a warm, dry environment like a desert, then you might have more yellow bile. And that was associated with, again, this violence, this irrationality, all of that kind of stuff. And the hotter the temperature, the more of that you would have. So that becomes important when we talk about this story, because let's look at a map of Europe real quick. Bring it up here. So when we look at this and we think about Shakespeare, Shakespeare is writing from England, right? That's where he's from, famously. So let's kind of center this map a little bit on Europe. And let me zoom in. There we go. Kind of zoom in here. I don't need directions. All right. So Shakespeare is writing from England. He's writing from England up here. And I mean, if you know anything about England, I've never been there, so I don't know that much. But, compared to the rest of Europe, it's more of a colder place, not very hot, rainy. So because it's in that cooler climate, we would predict if we lived at that time that people who lived there would be pretty calm, pretty rational, pretty subdued. But if you remember probably back to Romeo